So, the big news, of course, is that every time a new hard game is released, the discussions about difficulty and accessibility come hand in hand. People are saying Sekiro is bad because it's too hard. Sekiro is too bad because it doesn't have accessibility options. This game, and then you have people saying it's the reviewer or the viewer's fault. They suck at the game. Why should we care? And it goes back and forth like that. But accessibility, I think, means a lot depending upon who you're talking to. And it's very hard, I feel, to have this discussion because of that. Because some people, or accessibility can mean anything from quality of life features like, sorting in an ARPG, to features like a colorblind mode, subtitles, things like that. And it can also mean having modes that make your game easier. But yeah, as Dragon's saying there, accessibility doesn't always equal easy, and it's a term that hits so many different points. So I guess, for you, Shark, when you hear the term accessibility when it comes to a video game, what pops into your head?
What pops in my head is accessibility for disabled people. Mm-hmm. Colorblind mode, yep. One-hand mode, stuff like this, because a lot of game developers do not include that kind of thing, and they overlook it, and it's really bad for the game development as a whole, because we're leaving out a significant audience, for one thing, from enjoying our game, as well as basically, I don't know, telling them that they don't belong in gaming, and that's not like a true one for one, but it's kind of that in a way, and it's not good for gaming as a total to do that, and I feel like more developers should definitely put accessibility options in there, but yeah, I mean, you should have those kind of accessibility options in pretty much every game, and they're probably in less than 1% of games, and that's kind of sad.
So, I'm putting up on the screen now, this is the IGDA's Game Accessibility Special Interest Group, and what they've done over the years is not only push for more accessibility features in games, but they actually detail a lot of the disabilities, as well as things that help you if you're trying to design a game to get around them. And yeah, and that, for me, I think, like as Shark and as Alberto was saying in chat, like that's where accessibility, I think, comes in like easily for me. That if you're going, that you should be making your games as accessible as possible for people with disabilities or issues along those lines. And there have been talks about having like a standard, like almost like a standard quality of life list of things that should be in every video game. But again, it's very hard for the industry to come together on making things standard. Now, with that said, though, the tough part about when we talk about accessibility in video games, as Oscar Agor just said there, is what you can do versus the funds you have. And that's where things get very tricky. And when we start getting into the other aspect of accessibility, and that's to do with accessibility through gameplay or game design. So, before we talk about this, I just, again, want to point out that what we're discussing has nothing to do with colorblind mode, subtitles, things like that. That stuff should always be in a video game. What we're talking about is having the gameplay itself either be accommodating for people or to allow anyone to be able to finish a game. And that is a lot harder to talk about, get into some of the more philosophical discussions when it comes to video games. But here's my question for you, Shark, as a game developer. Do you think that everybody should be able to beat any game they buy or play? Should there be enough accessibility? Should we even use the term accessibility, or enough ways, whether it's easy mode, difficulty sliders, you name it? Should every game be beatable by everybody, regardless of skill?
Well, I'll throw back to an example old Nintendo games. There are some old Nintendo games that didn't have any endings that could never be beaten, period.
Mm-hmm.
Because they would just glitch out and fail. And if you look at the long-term effects of that, of people not being able to beat the game, nobody thinks positively of that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a developer, you're making this content for people to consume.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they're not consuming it, what's the point of making it in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what's the point of making a YouTube video if nobody watches it?
Yep.
Or only a very few people watch it, and you're not getting out the message that you wanted to get out.
There's another really big point here, as you were getting to, Shark, that it's very easy, and I've said this before, to go to either extreme, making a game, stupidly easy or impossibly difficult. Because all we're talking about is basically tweaking stats. If you want, how you can make Sekiro harder? Make every enemy do 3 times more damage. There we go, it's now a harder game. How we make it easier? Let's lower every enemy down to maybe a quarter of the damage that they would do. 1, 2, 3, we're done. But it's very hard to make difficulty levels that feel balanced for multiple skill levels. And that is where I think you need the hand or the eye of a good designer. Because I've played games that have done a really good job in terms of presenting things at different difficulty levels or different player states.
The core gameplay loop has to be enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
Or else people are not going to enjoy your game. And that's pretty much simple as that.
With something, again, as we're going back to, with a game like Sekiro or Dark Souls or things like that, it becomes that situation as to how would you make the game easier without breaking what that game is in the first place. And El Gordo joked about this earlier with this idea of having a quote-unquote story mode, where basically you essentially remove all the challenge of the game and let just someone essentially just play through for the story and have very little in terms of gameplay. And this is where this discussion gets, again, very tricky. Because some people will say that's a terrible idea because then you'll need to play the game. Other people will say it's a brilliant idea because you don't need to play the game. You can just enjoy the story. And again, it gets back to, I think, what exactly are you supposed to be getting out of this game? And let me see, who said it? BP's comment about not playing platformers. And that's a very interesting point. Because again, the most accessible platformer in the world convince someone who has never played a platformer to play that game.
Potentially.
I don't know. Would it?
It could potentially, because that's kind of what we went for with Chromasia. Is we tried to make it accessible to, we tried to keep the core thing of being a tactical RPG and having all the features and then some that the normal tactical RPGs have. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we redesigned the UI. We redesigned a lot of stuff in the UI stuff to make it accessible to new players who have never played it or never liked playing tactical RPGs. And I've had I made it a point to both test with, when we were testing the game, to test with both people who loved the genre and had a lot of experience with it, as well as people who hated the genre, people who never played the genre, people who were turned off by the genre, and they all loved it. All aspects of it, they loved it. So, it was like a entry point to people who didn't like it, people who hated it, people who were turned off by it. It was an entry point to all of them into tactical RPGs.
Yeah. So when I think about games that have really good gameplay accessibility to it, the ones that I think work, they integrate that into the game design or the game space itself. And this is where I think, when it comes to this kind of discussion, that I feel you have to either go all in or not at all on it. That if you're going to make your gameplay as accessible as possible, you have to dedicate, a focus of it to it. Like, a half-ass mode, I don't think helps anybody. And I have an example of, I guess, doing it right and doing it wrong. So the right example would be what Nintendo has done with a lot of their 3D titles. I think starting from Mario Odyssey 2 and on, you can play the game as, well or as bad as you want, but if you keep failing at a section, then they'll offer you kind of like a super power-up. Maybe it'll make you invulnerable to damage, or you won't die from a pit, or things like that. And it's only there if you start having trouble. If you're good at the game, you will never see it. It's only there when you need it, and it's integrated like that. And it works on every level. Now,
that's integrated difficulty, basically, where difficulty scales based on how you perform.
Yeah. And I think that's a really great example, again, because they balance the entire game around not needing to use that. But it's there as an option if you need it. And the game still works with or without it. Now, an example of not doing it right, I would argue, would be Cuphead. And I know we'll get to Celeste next. But for those of you who didn't play Cuphead, what they decided to do was, I think this was like really close to the game's launch or after, was have an easy setting. Right now you can play the game on normal or expert. When you play on easy, basically the enemies become a lot harder, they become a lot easier. They lose a lot of their patterns or cycles. And it sounds well, except for the fact that you can't beat the game on easy difficulty. If you try to go all the way to the end, when you get to the King Dice fight and the devil, you are not allowed to fight them on easy settings. The lure is that you're not technically beating the level when you're playing it on easy. And again, I think this is where that half-ass comes into play. That it's looked at worse if you don't go all the way than if you don't do anything at all, at least in my opinion. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, it's hard because, I mean, I don't know. From the look of it on my side as a developer, it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation, because you want people to experience the story, you want people to experience all the content, so you want all those maps to be playable in there, but at the same time you want people to play your game the way it was meant to be played, kind of thing. So it's your wants versus the wants of your consumers, and if you want to look good for your consumers and whatnot, you have to choose them over yourself, kind of thing. And then you have to give them some kind of motivation to choose to do it the way that you wanted it done, right? Maybe after you beat it, issue a challenge like, here's the ending, but you know what? You didn't get. There's some bonus content that you will only get if you complete this through another way. So get good and go do that.
The Contra 3 strategy right there. You can only get the good ending playing it on the hardest difficulty. Enjoy. Going back to what you were saying regarding making the game and trying to appeal to your consumer base, what happens if your consumer base are nothing but hardcore expert players? Then you run into another issue. How do you, as a matter of phrase, soften the difficulty while still making a game that they're going to enjoy? And the big example of that would be the La Mulana franchise. The people who love La Mulana love that game. It's one of their all-time favorite games, but that is a terribly designed game if you're trying to just play it casually. But of course people will say, oh, it's your fault that you're having trouble with this game. And again, we can use that same phrase for every one of these titles. Sekiro, Celeste, Cuphead, Dark Souls, you name it. People will immediately say it's your fault that you're having trouble with the game. And then that takes us right back to that whole discussion about what makes a game challenging versus just what makes a game hard.
Yeah, I mean, you could always include a dynamic difficulty scaling like they do in Mario and be like, well, like if you die a certain amount of times or something, it'll spawn a special weapon, or whatever, like
you get a hint, or
like what they call it in Mario is the box of shame or something, where you get the special golden box at the very beginning of the level that has a like basically an invincible thing. I've gotten that several times, and usually it doesn't help me.
It's very hard, again, for a lot of people to disassociate difficulty from just being a challenge from difficulty. Let's talk about the game that I know Gordo is waiting for me to rant about, and that is Celeste. And I'm thinking about making a little Twitter rant about this as well. But Celeste has become another one of those games that a lot of people hold up as a banner of accessibility. And that is, of course, due to its assist mode. But in my opinion, I want to get your thoughts on this, Shark, as well as for the people watching. I think that's kind of a cheat. Like, I don't think Celeste is as accessible as people would like to think it is. And the reason why I want to say that, as Gordo's beating me to it, is that the assist mode is not really within the game space. It's not designed, the game is not designed around it, I guess I should say. And what I mean is, if you haven't played it, it works like this. Anytime you turn on assist mode, and what that does is it gives you a menu of various things you can tweak. You can turn on invincibility. You can make your character have infinite jumps. You can even make pits not bother you. You can literally play Celeste with essentially infinite jumping, no damage, and there's no challenge to it. There's nothing. And this probably even goes beyond aim assist. This is basically let the game just perfectly shoot everybody in the head for you kind of difficulty. And Celeste was applauded for having this feature, saying that it allows anybody to play this game. But my issue is that none of those features are represented within the game space. And that I would say Celeste does not do a great job of teaching the player within the game how you play it as a platformer. Do you think the assist mode is a shining example of gameplay accessibility?
Well, I've never played Celeste, so I can't say from a first-hand point, but based on what you said, it sounds like they really lack on a tutorial, which that is bad accessibility right there, in my opinion. And you don't have to have a tutorial that is in your face, a lot of text or anything. Like, you can make a streamlined tutorial. I mean, Mario does it from the beginning, from Mario 1, because you see an enemy and you're approaching you see there's first you see there's two directions. One that there's a lot of space in front of you, one that there's not. So you're instinctively going to put one way and find out that you're moved that way. And then you see the first enemy and you say, okay, I'm going to hit one of these two buttons and see what it does. And one of them jumps. And they make it streamlined in a way that it's natural. We tried to do stuff in Chromasia like that. We failed on some of it, succeeded on others. But like the point is that a tutorial is not a bad thing. A tutorial is an absolutely needed thing, in my opinion. It's absolutely needed, and it's bad to not have one in any kind of way. Generally, you want one that is streamlined and that the player doesn't actually realize that there's a tutorial. Nobody realized there's a tutorial in Chromasia, which we succeeded in that, but we didn't succeed in teaching everything we need to teach. But we need to I think really need to have tutorials in every game, preferably streamlined ones that you don't realize that the players don't realize that they're going through, and make them interesting, not just boring. Here, move to this spot. Here, move to this spot, and it just force moves kind of thing. And I don't like those kind of things.
And that's of course what BP's saying is the grand philosophy of this whole discussion, that the gameplay is part of the experience. So if you remove all gameplay from your title, are you still playing a video game? And some would argue no. Others would argue yes, that you are ruining that game. But another major point that we hear is that people are saying that, why should I care what somebody else thinks? If I want to play this game on easy setting, infinite lives, hit one button and kills every enemy, why shouldn't the game accommodate me for that? And again, it's one of those very weird things. It goes back to I think El Gordo was saying earlier about how the sky is the limit when it comes to talking about accessibility features like this. And again, we're talking about gameplay accessibility. It's very easy to go in either extreme. Make a game that's frustratingly difficult or mind-numbing easy. But as a designer, do you want to, if you, smooth your game out so much because of that, or reduce all those features, is that even worth your time? Or even worth your time and money to do so? Again, with something like Celeste, that game was aimed at being a hardcore platformer first and foremost, and then they decided to do the assist mode. But the assist mode is not really something that's built within the game. With something like Sekiro, they could, theoretically go back to the design and create an easy mode, or create more of these features that could be turned on at a moment's notice. And
right. The going back to your thing you said earlier about why would you want to give the people an option basically to take the gameplay out of it basically and just watch it as kind of a movie kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say no, because again, back to our discussion earlier about would you want them to skip content, with the ending of the game and everything. You want the player to experience all the content, and because otherwise there's no point in making it. And the gameplay is part of that content, of course. I mean, that is a large part of that content. So you would want them to experience that.
But then, of course, again, you have people who argue, well, why should you decide what I experience in your game? Again, that's a very popular remark we see people make on Twitter, on posts, features, anything like that. That who are you to say that I shouldn't be allowed to skip through this entire game? I paid for it. And again, it goes back to, what is the aim of the developer? Like I said, with something like Sekiro, Dark Souls, any hard game that you can think of, you could spend a few extra months or however long it would take to add in the easy mode or the story mode. But would that necessarily help your game past launch? And again, it's one of those, as we've said many times already, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, kind of thing. Because
the thing you said about the customer saying they paid for the game, and if you look at the whole picture of things as like a developer, as a consumer, all these things, that they didn't actually pay for the game. The developers or the publishers paid for the game, and they paid for access to a copy of that game. It's like a famous artist makes the Rembrandt, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody paid for the Rembrandt except for the person who paid the dollars to get it. Mm-hmm. They paid for a copy, a high quality copy of that Rembrandt art that has a lot of the same features, a lot of the enjoyment, but it's not the actual one. You know what I mean? It is a copy of the actual one.
I just want to
They
say
pay
that
for
whenever we
copy.
talk about ownership of games, I know people really love when we say that you just buy a copy of it. You buy the license to a game, not the game itself. I know there's so many people who love that discussion.
Yeah, I hate that one myself, but I mean, in the end, it is true to a point.
To wrap things up for talking about game accessibility or gameplay accessibility, like I said, I think the best examples are those that, again, they don't half-ass it, and that it has to be thoughtfully integrated into the game space. Even if players will never see it or never make use of it, the best ones kind of fit within the game itself. And it goes beyond just having, like, aim assist or auto win buttons or things like that. Because at the end of the day, if you want somebody to experience your game, then they need to experience what you're presenting to them. And if you fail because either A, you've removed all the depth of your game, thinking that it's going to make your game more appealing, or you make it too hard that only a fraction of the people will be able to experience it, both are, I think, considered failures. And I think that is a very big point that a lot of people don't talk about. That you can fail a game by making it too hard, just as you can fail your design by making it too easy. At the end of the day, your game should be enjoyable from a gameplay perspective by all skill levels. And the design needs to accommodate and allow for that. But getting to that point, again, it takes a lot of time and understanding. And why so few games have really done that. So, before I throw things over to you, Shar, to get your final thoughts on this topic, I want to ask you and everybody this question. Can you think of games that have done a really great job of being built around multiple skill levels? I.e., somebody brand new can enjoy this game, just as a hardcore or veteran of a genre can enjoy it as well.
Well, a lot of Nintendo games are really good at doing that kind of thing. They have run this field for so long, and that's one thing they have definitely developed from the very beginning is gameplay accessibility in a lot of their games, and they've been really and they've had to a point because of all the crazy gadgets they come up with and try to get us to buy and everything. And because if they weren't easy to use,
nobody would risk
they would
money.
sell less than what they already sell.
Yeah. All right. And do you have any final thoughts on the topic before we move on?
Not really. I think we pretty much hit most of the notes. I think
if you're looking for a book on design, my first title, 20 Essential Games to Study, is out now. It is available where most books are sold, and it comes in paper, hardcover, or digital copies. This is the perfect book for anyone interested in learning about game design, whether you are a student, enthusiast, or just a fan.